Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto Jr., who is a visual artist, a performer, and a curator. His work explores complex histories of colonialism that are exacerbated by contemporary international politics and, in the process, unpacks the intersections of queerness and Islam through his multimedia performance. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was born in Damascus in 1990, and he is a curator. He has been a curatorial resident at a SOMArts Cultural Center, where he co-curated the third Muslim, queer, and trans-Muslim narratives of resistance and resilience, and he is shown in galleries, museums, and theaters globally. He has spoken extensively on the intersections of faith, radical thought, and futurity. Sorry, having problems reading today.
That's
At
right.
Columbia University, UC Berkeley, Stanford, and NYU, Bhutto is currently based in San Francisco, California, where he received his MFA at the San Francisco Art Institute in 2016. And I have been lucky enough to work with Zulfikar twice now, actually. And I'm very pleased about that, so thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm so excited to talk with you about my work since you're familiar with it already, having already curated two shows and other shows. I mean, I feel like I've been so familiar with the artists that you've worked with and such an incredible roster of people. So
Thank you.
it's such a pleasure
It's
to be
such a
here right
pleasure to be
now.
chatting to you. Now, tell me something. Let's dive right in. You wear multiple hats. You wear the hat of an artist, a performer, a curator, and you also explore distinct and fictional narratives that have been inspired by Sufi Islam and social movements, sort of current, historic, futuristic. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the crux of your practice, perhaps?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, I guess, you mentioned wearing many hats. I feel very much a need and desire to constantly explore. And I think for me, what is most important when I go through a new project is the idea in the project, is how does aesthetics are also very important actually for me. I shouldn't say it's just the idea, but the idea is the driving force in terms of what mediums I use. Um, and so, for example, right now, this current project that I'm doing is really a way to try and look at histories of revolution, right? I mean, a lot of futurism, when we think about futurism, it isn't always about the future, actually. It's not necessarily that we're looking at the year 2055, and what does 2055 look like logically if we were to take in everything. It's really not about logic or reason or actual prediction. It's more so about the having the future as a blank canvas onto which we can we can imagine other possibilities, or we can also test out. Sometimes it's joyful, and sometimes it's testing out our worst nightmare too.
Which
And I
is
think
important to do as well, given current situations as well. And I mean, even things like climate change, for example, if we don't actually start thinking about a possible future and possible iterations of it, it's very likely that we will not be able to prepare for it. And
mhm.
we haven't done so already anyway. So things will
Yes.
just get drastically more confusing and perhaps worse.
Yes, no, for sure, and it allows us the space to contemplate and to think and to research, right? I think that's another thing too, and for me, what has been, with this series that I've been doing, which is called Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth, which has taken up about 3+ years of my life. I started working on it in 2017 at some point. I
Wow.
think I want to say September. So maybe it's been about, yeah, 3 years. And so it's been, so a lot of it is research based, and it's research based in terms of the historical. And it started off as a purely historical research, right? Like looking at revolutionary movements in the past in South Asia, in the Arab world, in North Africa, And for me, that was important because I grew up in such a political family that the idea of politics and emancipation and emancipatory politics had been so ingrained in my mind that I wanted to see what did that kind of emancipatory politics look like in a way that was all-inclusive, radically all-inclusive. And radically all-inclusive of women, of trans people, of queer people, of a whole variety of people. Because the way I was seeing revolutionary movements historically was that they were so amazing in their ideas and in their scope and what they were trying to achieve, but sadly, they would always fall flat when it came to being actually radically inclusive. Women were not taken seriously, queer people were not taken seriously, trans people were not taken seriously.
How interesting. So even in the fight for justice or the fight for moving forward and change, only part of society or part of individuals were considered important enough to continue the movement with, essentially.
Totally. And I think that's basically, I think, a lot of what I was seeing. And then we have very few and sparse examples of women in particular who joined revolutionary movements. Or if there were queer people who joined revolutionary movements, it was always a cheeky piece of gossip. It made them less serious. And this was it made them less serious. People didn't want to take them seriously enough. And I think for me, that was something I wanted to challenge, right? So with this series, it's kind of an investigation into characters and figures who could have been. It's a sort of resurrecting of possible queer heroes, right?
It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, it must have been such an interesting journey and a research project, because I'm sure at the time also, I mean, people were often quite secretive about, tendencies, and it must have been difficult to find, but also added layers of nuance and meaning to the individuals whose histories you were researching about.
Yes, totally.
You kind of look at them in an entirely different light then.
You look at them in an entirely different light, and
given what they were struggling with at that time.
Yes, for sure. And in some ways, one has to take liberties because, these histories are so shrouded in secrecy, and we have to look at people's lives and deaths, right? And I think for me, there's a literal thing of resurrection, right? Like one character in particular I work with is Shahida Sanam Hedli, who was a Lebanese freedom fighter, who was one of the first women to actually record a video saying why she was a freedom fighter and why she was going to take her action. And in her video, she says, she speaks to her father at the end of the video, her mother and her father, and she speaks to her father and she says, forgive me, Father, you won't be able to walk me down the aisle for my wedding because I'm marrying the soil of the earth instead.
Oh.
And it's moments like this, it's moments like this where you realize, like, this person may or may not have been queer. We don't know. We don't know any relationships they had. We don't know of anything. But then if we expand, what does queer mean? I think a lot of people think of queer as meaning, LGBT, right? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. But queerness is more than that. Queerness is a politics. Queerness is a way of looking at the world. Queerness is a way of not being stuck in one frame of thinking, right? And I is it okay to swear on this platform?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I always like to say that queerness is not about who you fuck, but the systems you try to fuck up. And I think for me, that's how I've taken this project, and that's how I've taken this idea of queerness, and that's how I've actually been able to get liberty in finding queer characters from the past through
because you're looking at such a broad a broad description of it as well.
A broad description of it as well, yeah. And I think for me, the ways in which that manifests, right? It's like, how do you, when you look at history, how do you bring it back and how do you reimagine it? And so video becomes a big part of my practice. I'm currently working on a pretty extensive video series. And then there's also textile work comes into the practice as well.
The archive as well, which is
the archive.
What all of this part of it.
And how do you translate the archive? How do you make sense of the art? Like how do you project the archive
Well, how have you
artistically?
projected the archive? Tell me a couple of examples.
Um, so I guess, I mean, in one way, Shahida Sanam Headley, who was the person I was talking about, I did a performance and a video in which my character, which I think we'll talk about later, but my performance alter ego was herself fought in this future revolution that I talk about, and then is martyred, and then is resurrected. And through her process of resurrection, she's able to talk to ghosts. So she talks to the ghost of Shahida Sanam Headley in this performance, and then also in this video. And she, it's a conversation that actually uses actual audio sound bites from Shahida Sanam Headley's farewell video, essentially, and pairs it with Faluda Islam, who lip syncs her voice, and then lip syncs her own voice as well. So it has
Lots of
through
layers.
a separate video that's made to layer with this other video. So it becomes, and all of my work is collaborative. In this particular project, I collaborated with Anna Mawan, who's an incredible artist, video artist, designer, projectionist, just all around amazing. And then also Hushidar Mortazai, who's a fashion designer, and he actually has designed a lot of my costumes very generously. So yeah, I mean, I like everything to be quite bespoke. Everything has to kind of be
very particular.
Very particular. It has to be, the project itself. I don't like taking things from here and there and trying to. I like to sort of have things.
It's all done for you.
Yes.
Special.
All done for me. Yeah. No. I mean,
that makes sense.
But yeah, so that's one way in which the archive is used, and I think another way is archival material of wrestlers that you've probably seen in my textile work, and the reason why the wrestler comes into this is because, again, looking into history, the pehelwan or the mal, which is the Sindhi word, has been historically within South Asia and Iran especially a symbol of heroism. Looking at the story of the Ramayana, Hanuman the monkey god who saves Sita from the evil Ravan and brings her back to Rama, he's a wrestler. He's a monkey god, king, wrestler. He's all those things. He's a king, he's a monkey, he's a god, and he's a wrestler. And the wrestler is important because he's physically strong, but also ethically strong, morally strong. And it's a very intense love he has for Rama and Sita, And then we look at the Shahnameh, and Rustam is also a Pahalwan. He's also a wrestler. He's also, and in many ways there's some problematic, toxic elements to this because they're both men and they represent these sort of men saving these damsels in distress. And but at the same time, there's also a sort of delicateness that comes with them as well. And I think for me, if we look at this history of like, okay, the hero is the wrestler who encapsulates this stereotypical idea of of male heroism or male strength, then how do we then pull, what does the revolutionary leader of the future look like in an inclusive queer or trans or femme woman-led movement? So, obviously it's not realistic, but I decided to bedazzle these wrestlers and make them look all the more glittery and sort of subvert the ultra-masculine side of it and feminizing it a bit more, making it more opulent. A revolution.
I think that's very important.
Totally, and you've seen a lot of this work, and for me, I want to be part of a revolution that's opulent. I want beauty in the revolution. I want
exactly.
Yeah, to step into a world where things are shiny.
And also, I mean, if you think about it historically, things have been shiny. Men used to wear heels, they wore wigs, they wore a lot of jewelry. We only need to look at our own sort of miniature paintings of the Mughals to see how men used to dress up to the nines, really.
For sure.
So it's very strange that is now being challenged, and people think that masculinity only equals being very minimalistic or not wearing jewelry or not dressing up. Right. So I think it's constantly changing, and it's very interesting that you are now drawing those tropes into the presentation of these Pahalwan.
Totally. I mean, the past is so important in imagining the future because as much as we like to think the human imagination is unlimited, actually it is limited. It's limited to what we know. It's limited to what we've seen.
And we often
Um,
forget. We forget what's already happened in the past. Our little memories are quite tiny.
True, true, true. Exploring the archive is a reminder more than anything else. It's a reminder of of both the positive things that maybe we've forgotten and also the negative things that we need to remember.
Quite
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
And besides, who doesn't love a little bit of bedazzling and glitter? It really cheers everything up. I'm planning
Yes.
an event, and the first thing I wanted was lots and lots of fairy lights because they're sparkling. And
Ah!
literally, that's what I was like, I must get fairy lights.
Oh my
But
goodness,
for
I love
similar
that.
reasons, you know.
I love that. There was an artist during the oh dear, maybe I shouldn't. Because I've totally forgotten the name, but there was an artist during the Biennale that made this, maybe it was Iftikhar Dadi actually, who made this beautiful installation. It was like a whole, in the Karachi Biennale, it was a beautiful green room. And it was, those lights that like, where it's like lots of fluffy things and the lights come on the end?
That was Imran Qureshi, and it was
That
at
was
the
Imran
Lahore Biennale.
Qureshi.
Yeah, and he done it in the fort. It
In
was
the
a beautiful
fort.
piece.
That, yeah,
But
no.
Iftikhar Dadi and Elizabeth Dadi also exhibited in the fort, and they had a lot of sort of what is it called, neon lights going on as well, and it was
Yes.
really lovely.
Yes, no, I'm into that. I'm totally, yes. No, I was very into that. It was for me that I love green. I love that most of my
Mm.
lighting and my performances is green. One for Islam and also because it's spooky.
I was going to wear a green shirt, and then I thought it was too
Ah,
vibrant, and I decided to change. I should have kept it on.
oh my goodness. I need to get more
I
green
know.
shirts. I have a green hat that says green is like
My family is extremely involved in cricket. My father loves it, so we go to
oh
many, many matches. So then we all have the many, the green Pakistan T-shirts that you have to wear
yes.
during the match,
Oh my
and the
god.
green cap.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Yeah,
Yes, of course you probably greened up.
yeah, lots of green.
Hmm, hmm,
But
hmm.
tell me now. So I like the way that you were talking about how your work moved from. Well, I mean, you mentioned it briefly, but how the work moved from the initial looking at the textiles and the Musalman series, and then kind of generally maneuvering it towards the more current work that you've been doing, which is set in this futuristic realm. Can you tell me a little bit more about this journey? Did it just sort of stem from researching the past, archiving materials, and then sort of imagining a future?
Um, yeah, I mean it's interesting. I think for me, fabric slowly started creeping into my practice in ways that I
Mm.
was conscious and subconscious of. I mean, conscious in the sense that I was obviously using this material, but I wasn't conscious of using it in a way that was craft oriented, right? Like, and I think a lot of artists need to like drop the snobbery behind like what is craft and what is art, because if I had the fraction of the skill of a tailor in a workshop, like that would be amazing. Like we should really not be, we should not be, having prejudices against craft. But for me, I think I did. Like a lot of artists, you wanted to be the artist, you didn't want to be the craftsman, right? And so fabric would come in, but not in a way that was not in a way that was like, oh, I'm gonna work with this. And a lot of what I was working with before in Pakistan was looking at issues of marginalization in general. I was looking at what
Mm.
does the margins look like, what does the periphery of society look like, and looking, in Pakistan, of course, and this is a topic that keeps coming up, and especially now it's been coming up, is the issue of religious minorities
Mm-hmm.
and the highly contested issue of religious minorities of being totally totally. Hi, I'm saying hi to friends now.
Yeah, you're getting lots of
For
really
being,
great praise. Sometimes when
yeah,
I start giggling, it's because of the comments, and
right.
I'm really happy that there are people who are listening who adore
Yes,
Zulfikar so much.
thank you,
It's been very sweet
everybody.
to read
It's
them.
very sweet. I'm blushing, but I think, yeah. So marginalization, right? So especially the Hindu community. I spent 4 years actually on a project working with the Hindu
Oh.
community. Yeah, actually, really a long time. And like mostly it was photography. It was documenting, and it was also researching the actual religious practices of Pakistani Hindus, of Sindhi Hindus, because this is actually, Hinduism is not a monolith, and in Sindh especially it functions in so many interesting ways. And then that kind of pivoted into looking at the intersections of religion and class in Pakistan as well, and caste. A lot of Pakistanis tend to think we don't have caste. We have caste, especially in Sindh we have caste. And even if you don't call it caste, it is embedded in our society, right? People are born into the trades that they ultimately work in, right? And I think this was something that it then went into this whole thing. And me, especially in my case, I'm come from a family that's both Shia and Sunni, but Muslim, and I'm a male. And for me, I was in this position of privilege of like, okay, well, let's talk about the issues at hand. And then I moved to America, and I was still talking about these issues, but they became harder and harder to talk about from so far away. It became disingenuous. It became like, ultimately when you can't constantly speak for oppressed communities. Ultimately, really is what happened.
Especially when you're not there physically.
Especially when you're not there.
You can't represent them. And it feels a little incorrect to try to represent them in an external setting in a way. I understand what you mean.
Yes, totally. And so when I came to the United States, I was trying to figure out how to talk about the Hindu community with all this material I had from here. And that's when I started really going to material, and I started looking at like transparencies, acetate, photography, light boxes. A show that my first ever solo show was actually at Abdullah Qureshi's Gallery 39K in Lahore.
Oh, lovely.
And he was so sweet. Like he had confidence in me. He was like, "Go for it. This is, this is your solo
Abdullah
show."
is very nurturing, so I can
very
see that.
very nurturing. And honestly, I was like, I don't know if I'm ready, but I have this opportunity. I'm going to go for it. And we did a lot of light boxes, transparencies, and it was a very experimental show.
It also sounds like a very fun show. Maybe that's not the right word. But I do like exhibitions that are a mix of materials. Mm-hmm. And it's quite fascinating to have researched an entire culture or part of it in Pakistan. And when you get that chance to present, it must have been quite the feeling of relief and, in a way, achievement as well, to be able to show your findings to everyone else and say, oh, this is what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Totally, and especially in Pakistan, and it was really something. And then I started experimenting with photography and fabric, and that's kind of where it started. And I was still in grad school, and I was still doing it, and I was doing things like cutting holes in fabric and putting it on. It was very, very messy. And then I saw somewhere on Instagram, actually, when I first downloaded Instagram, somebody had done embroidery on magazine covers. So I was like, oh, that looks pretty. Shame that I can't do that. And then I was like, why can't I do that? And then I kind of taught myself initially how to do embroidery, and it started out with embroidery. And then my thesis show was a giant piece that was this giant piece that was actually honoring a lot of the martyrs who were killed during the movement for restoration of democracy in Pakistan during the Zia-ul-Haq's regime. So it was this huge tapestry piece that was like all these panels of their obituary photos and their names behind, and it would combine the sort of fabric.
It must have been so hugely powerful.
I think a lot of people who resonated with it. So it was interesting. This is also something that has come into my practice a lot is audience perception of the work and who projects what onto work, right? Because no matter how much we try and control the narrative, no matter how many wall texts we put in our gallery, ultimately the viewer gets final say.
Exactly. They're the ones who decide.
They will walk away. Yeah, they will walk away with what they will walk away with. And that's just it, right? And so when I put that piece up, it was for my thesis exhibition, and a lot of people who I noticed who are either Latino or Arab or Muslim or South Asian, they understood what this image was, because I think we understand. We've seen so many people die in the places that we come from that we know what an obituary photo looks like. We know the sort of stern expression, the passport style photo, the real sort of like front-facing portrait, and especially when it's black and white, right? Like this, it becomes it's a very sobering thing, I think, for a lot of people. Whereas other people who are not of these people who are like white Americans were like, oh, is this like a family album?
And I would have called it as this mugshots, actually, because the way that you're describing the photographs also looks like a bit like a mugshot. Black and white, stern expression, staring straight on. So I'm surprised they got a family album and not mugs. But anyway, good. I'm glad they haven't. It's also wonderful that people have not had to deal with trauma in their lives, you know, so that's great for them.
Yes, that's great for them, exactly.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It is wonderful, but it was great that people understood it. And I embroidered into each of these images sort of red embroidery that connected each image together. But that was my first big attempt at fabric, and I was hooked. And I was just absolutely hooked. And then I went, please stop me if you feel like you want to get to the next question. But
no, I'm enjoying this actually. So
okay,
please keep
cool.
going, because I feel as though we're getting to the point eventually.
Yes, we are getting to the point. I'm getting there.
Yeah, that's fine.
I swear. And when, again, with Abdullah Qureshi, it was that same year, that same time I was doing that solo show. We were obviously going around in Lahore, and they were being a wonderful host. And we went to this, one of the many book bazaars on Mall Road, I think by the Art University, NCA, National College of Arts. And it was this, secondhand book bazaar, and there were books that were super old, like 150-year-old, like the Ghalib poems, and I don't know, like what else. It was really, really beautiful stuff. And then also there was this book that was a translation of an Arnold Schwarzenegger exercise book.
Oh, and that's where you found it.
That's where I found it. Wow. And I saw it, and it was so beautiful because there's this beautiful, this beautiful Urdu script, this beautiful Nastaliq Urdu script with, and this print, it's printed. So, I feel like printed Urdu books are so beautiful. Like, they're so beautiful. And this was also, in some way, it looked like kind of Xerox, because it was... it was obviously a pirate copy translation, so it was all black and white, and there were these really prominent images of these muscly men and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this Urdu text that was basically just how do you exercise, right? And I think it was for me really, really interesting because it was so mundane. The text was so mundane, and the imagery made it so much more charged, right? Because you're looking at a society, Pakistan, which is incredibly homosocial. There's so much tension in the air when it comes to male-to-male bonding in spaces. And this book, which was originally written for a white, let's say, audience or an American audience, right? They're these sort of white-passing male bodies performing essentially for a white male gaze. To impersonate or to imitate or to admire or whatever. And then there was then the translation added another layer. So it was white male bodies performing for a white male gaze, then being reinterpreted and now performing unwillingly for a South Asian male gaze. And that for me was super interesting. So I basically scanned lots and lots of pages from the book, and over a period of a couple of years, printed them on fabric and intervened with quilting and intervened with embroidery. And I have to say that series, I'd love to say that I started it just knowing exactly what to do, but honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. I did everything by hand first. Everything by hand. Then after that, I learned how to use a sewing machine. Then I got a sewing machine. Then I started doing backing. Then I started doing embroidery. And honestly, if you had seen the first few pieces I made in this series, they were so badly displayed. I learned
That's
so
all
much.
Part of it.
That's
but tell me, did you ever reach out to Arnold Schwarzenegger and say, "Hey, this is what I found in Pakistan in the bazaar, and look what I've done with it. Here's a photograph of my work."
I tagged him on Twitter when I had my first solo exhibition of that work in San Francisco.
Good.
Yeah, I tagged him on Twitter. He didn't respond, which is fine. Which is fine. I mean, it's funny because in
Oh,
California, a lot of
that's
people see
okay. Maybe
Arnold.
he didn't understand.
Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he was like, "Who the hell is this?" But in California, he was also the governor here, which is something that we shouldn't forget. So when I showed his images here, people were like, "Ugh, I hated it when he was governor because he was Republican governor, right?" So people were like, it was like a charged moment for some people,
That's so
but
interesting. So people then could relate to that in a different way as well, knowing
totally,
him as a governor and a more of a political figure, as
yeah.
opposed to the actor or the muscle man that the book was portraying him as.
Yes, the Muslim man. Yeah, I mean, he's not Muslim, but
Yeah.
I mean, yes, and also, again, that's the reason why I use Urdu or Arabic or Farsi text, is because the way people were relating the text to the image was very interesting because people didn't necessarily hear it in this country know that this was an exercise book. So I would get people coming up to me being like, I love that you've like put together images of like these men with like the Quran. And I was like, I would never do that. And
Yeah. That's
I
not
would
what
be
that
like,
is.
that's not what that is, but it'd be interesting because that's what people's impression was of this language, is that it immediately meant Islam. And in the United States, even though we know that religion doesn't dictate how you write your script necessarily, and but for them it was, and it was an immediate association with Islam. It was an immediate association with Muslim countries, right? And then what is then the further projection of that Americans or British people have of Muslim countries is it's a dangerous impression, right? So there would be this really interest. I could tell that people were really trying to figure out what the hell I was doing, and I loved that. I loved that lack of legibility, and at the same time, I loved how when it went to Pakistan, it was legible, and then the masculinity elements and the other more subversive elements and the nuance elements could come through a lot more. But in this context too, the way that people were confused by it. Like there's something like I hate being too legible. Like I don't want to be so immediately understood.
But also because your work does have so many layers, so it's not entirely legible in the first go anyway. You do bring layers of meaning into everything that you create. The textile pieces as well, the fact that you're hand sewing everything, the fact that you're bringing in this archival book that it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. There are reasons behind all of this. So it's nice that not everything comes immediately,
Yeah,
understandable, that it
thank
takes a
you.
while.
No, totally. And I think it's important for people to sit with it a little bit and to make their own conclusions. Yeah.
And so then you sort of move from this towards the futuristic practice, and you came upon well, I guess maybe you didn't come upon her, but your alter ego. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the comments are going to be like now that I mention her. But
Oh,
let's
does she
pray.
have quite the following?
Let's pray for positivity. I don't know. She's a little bit of a funny figure. She's an interesting person. I think she's gotten a lot more attention than me in some cases. But her name is Faluda Islam, and I she was birthed. She was birthed out of a pure need for expression. Um, uh, um, I mean, I wanted to have a good time. That's when she originally came about. I wanted to explore something playfully. And drag became a way to explore gender playfully, to explore costume playfully, to explore character building playfully. And the name came out of a whole thing of like I used to be called Zulfi Kulfi. And my dad used to call me Zulfi Kulfi because I loved Kulfi, and he used to call me Kulfi Faluda or Zulfi Faluda. So I kind of just chose Faluda.
Oh, that's so
And
special that it's so closely
yeah,
related to him as well.
totally. And for me, Islam came in because I'm a Muslim, and Islam is a last name. And I wanted to take ownership of that, and I wanted to make sure that people knew who they were dealing with. Um, and
Your father's son. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and also a Muslim, a queer Muslim drag queen, right? Like this was important for me as well, right? That representation was there, and yeah. So for her, she initially started out as this just drag queen performing, kind of like the learning ropes of drag. I wanted to go through the actual, like, what do drag queens do? And so I started, I was kind of in a sort of drag family, and, you learn how to do the makeup and you perform in the bars, and it's kind of a rat race, honestly. Like, people are just, they're performing every night, and there was at one point I was performing 4 or 5 times a week, and it was exhausting, and it was really amazing, and it was really awful, and it was all these things. And then I realized that I was really tired and I needed Faluda Islam to represent something else for me.
You took a bit of a mini break, something a bit calmer.
Yeah, a little calmer. So I put her more into the theater scene. I put her more into the experimental performance scene. And she started to represent a queering of my father's legacy. And what I mean by that is that, as I think it's very difficult to describe, I think, to a world what it's like to grow up as a queer son of a father who's not present physically in your life, but is present emotionally, and you're reminded of every day. And I was 6 when he died, and I remember what I remember, and I hold those close. But people were constantly telling me, "Oh, you need to be like your father in this way. You need to be like your father in this way. You need to be blah, 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 blah. Your father did this. Your father did that. Your father did this. So do that too." And for me, it made no sense. I didn't understand. I was me. I was me, and I was no one else, and I couldn't pretend to be someone else. I lost.
And also, you don't, at that time, people also are trying to be kind, I'm sure, but they don't realize that you remember your father because you are your father's son.
Yes.
So you know how he did things. You don't need to be told that by another person.
You're so right. No, you're so right. And people forget that. People forget that. They forget that, like, oh, I actually have a really wonderful, cherished memory of him. And I don't, he was not, I don't remember him shouting once. I don't remember him getting upset. Anytime I asked him to do something silly, even if it was in front of guests, he would do it. So for me, my impression of my father is lighthearted and playful. And a lot of other people seem to think that he was a lot more serious. And I was like, oh. So for me,
everybody has their versions in front of individuals, and in front of their son, who's only 6. Everyone, I don't know, I think that your memory is important, and you should hold on to that and not let it be colored by other people.
Thank you. And that was what Faluda Islam was doing. I mean, her death, she's a martyr, right? And her story, her origin story, starts through martyrdom. And in many ways, this video project I'm doing, which is going to end the Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth series, looks specifically actually at Faluda Islam's life and death in a way that parallels my father's life and death, from his exile to his time in prison to his death, and then it goes into the after death as well, this project. And for me, the crux of Faluda Islam, the weight of Faluda Islam actually lies in the time after death. And Faluda Islam's story is most weighted in that time because she's resurrected. She becomes this zombie. And for me, zombies are not just interesting Hollywood characters. They have an incredible history in Haitian folklore and in Haitian religion and in African religion and in Vodun. And they also represent something very weighted in popular culture as well. And I'm going to get a little bit zombie nerdy, and then we can go on to the next questions, because I think this is important to explain.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Quickly.
Okay. So she's a zombie. She's a zombie for this very particular reason, that the zombie, there's a text called the Zombie Manifesto that actually informs a lot of my practice. And in the Zombie Manifesto, there's a whole genre of zombie studies. You can take it at university. But in the Zombie Manifesto, the zombie does not work as an individual. If you ever see a zombie in a movie, for example,
it's always like with people.
They're always with other zombies, and they're not moving with an individual ego in mind. They're all moving together as one mass to one goal, right? And that is why people are so scared of zombies, because they represent the masses rising, the unstoppable, untirable masses rising. And Faluda Islam very much represents the first of the zombies rising. For example, let's think, if we could imagine all of our heroes who have been killed, or all of the people that we love, who we've lost, who are fighting, what if they were all resurrected and fought back? You know, there's this both horrifying, intense feeling of it's both emancipatory and horrifying is basically what it is. And Faluda Islam is both of those things. She's the anti-hero.
And she's leading the charge in a sense.
She's leading the charge, and also she's not exactly your typical hero. She's a zombie, she's a drag queen, she's gross, she's all of these things. She's the unwilling anti-hero. But that's all I want to say. Mm-hmm.
That's very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I want to ask so many more questions, but I need to keep to time, which is very annoying. But I'll ask you lots of questions afterwards. I wanted to also get to your own curating, because I think that's also an extremely important part of your practice. So let's speedily talk through that as well.
Yes. Okay.
Tell me about maybe this. I mean, how has perhaps your practice informed the curating and vice versa? And what are some of the themes that you've been playing around with, or working on, not playing around with?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I think for me, curating is a form of organizing. As someone who's, who is, I wouldn't call myself an activist. I think people have called me an activist, but I think activists are a lot more active, and their minds are geared a lot more towards policy and very, very nitty-gritty things. And I'm not necessarily. And I think for me, my curatorial work is a way of organizing people around similar themes that have a political side. So, for example, one of my first big curatorial project was here in San Francisco called The Third Muslim, Queer and Trans Muslim Narratives of Resistance and Resilience, which I did with Yaz Ahmed. And all of my curatorial projects are collaborative. Usually it's the two of us come together, or one of us has an idea, and oh, sorry, that wasn't my first big one. Okay, that was my second big one. But it was a big one here, and it was the first ever large-scale exhibition that included queer and trans Muslim artists, speakers, the first ever queer imam also was one of our speakers, people involved in culture and fashion, and all these different things. It was a 1 month long exhibition and series of events. And that for me was a way of being like, where are we? Where are our people? Right? How do we find our people? Let's do an exhibition. We did an exhibition thinking, maybe there's not enough people in San Francisco who are queer and Muslim, because a lot of our artists were not from San Francisco. And then we did the exhibition, and there were so many queer and trans Muslims who came to the exhibition. And it was like, if you build it, they will come.
How did they respond? They must have been so happy to have found that exhibition as well.
It was incredible. It was a big high. It was a big high in terms of the community response. I think, and people were glad that there was something to go to. And before that, Abdullah Qureshi and I did curate an exhibition called Isai Ke Parcham Tale, which was an inverse of Is Parcham Ke Sae Tale, which was like a 5-part exhibition that included artists who are from religious minorities, gender minorities, young children artists as well. And it looked at this idea of marginalization within Pakistan and how does it function politically and how are people responding to it. And my most recent exhibition that I curated was with Azim Siraj. It came down in February 17th of 2020, so right before everything just shut down. And that was with Azim Siraj, a dear friend of mine. I'm in love with all the people I co-curate with. This is also just a fact.
That's so special to hear. And it's important to have good relationships with your co-curators.
Yeah, it's
especially when people are on the same wavelength as you, then that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. For sure, yeah.
I was going to ask, what are you working on now? And also I wanted to ask, perhaps before that, about the exhibition you did recently in Karachi. Maybe not so recently anymore, but I know that it was about a year ago. How was that? How did you feel exhibiting back in Pakistan after being in the US for a few years?
It was great. It was great. I think it obviously came with a lot of the trying to navigate things I was anticipating but not quite, and but I think I was held very well. Aziz Sohail curated that exhibition, and I think it was really, really well done, and it was done with Sanat. And Sanat had just shifted into this giant warehouse space, which was very exciting. And also, I had to really be like, we gotta make this show work. We're gonna have to work a lot. This is a giant space, and that's a difficult space to work with. Honestly, it needs a lot of love and attention in a very particular way. But that was a beautiful show, and I spoke to a lot of young people. I spoke to a lot of students, college students, high school students, about language, about queerness, about all these different things, and yeah, I think a lot of people involved in that show, and there were many people, including Aziz and myself and Abid, as well as my family, who will always support me, and my friends. So it was really lovely to be back. And what am I working on now? Right, that was the next question. What am I working on now in the future?
These days, how's it going?
I am okay. I am working on a 7-part video series, which is kind of the conclusion to Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth, alongside alongside a sort of accompanying fabric book. I don't know if you've seen some of the cyanotypes I've done online, but cyanotypes are these blueprints. If you go to my Instagram and scroll down, you can see some. But and I've managed to get some funding, a grant to finish this video project, and I'm working with. Yeah, and I'm working, thank you, and I'm working with my collaborators who I've worked with before, and this is kind of like our final push. And so that's going to be probably releasing next year in 2021, probably around June 2021. So, or maybe even later, I'm not sure. But it depends. So that's something that's kind of in the works. And then after that, I have plans of, potentially looking at water issues in Pakistan. A lot of my love has been in the River Indus and the faith that goes around the Indus, the religion of the Indus, the people of the Indus, the animals of the Indus.
That'd be fascinating. What a fantastic idea.
Thank you. And I've been looking at it already for a while, and I'm hoping that will be the next project that I do. Because really, I mean, if artists aren't thinking about the ways that the environment intersects with our future, then it's gonna be a tough future.
You're quite right. And I was actually going to ask how you were feeling about leaving behind this big project that you've been working on for such a long time. But it sounds as if you have something super exciting to look forward to that's equally important.
Oh my goodness, of course. I can't. I need something to keep my brain occupied.
Of course. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we should open it up to questions because we have a couple of extra minutes, and I think they're going to be lots and lots of questions, and then we can see how that goes.
Should I trust you to vet them? And I just as
and
a
you
warning,
can also vet.
I can also vet. I don't know how to see them quite so well, and also I totally will not answer anything I don't feel like answering. So apologies in advance to anybody who feels hurt.
I think that's completely fine.
Yes.
You can answer any questions. We have lots of waves and hearts.
How do we know? I don't see any questions. I see somebody doing
I see lots of comments. Someone says the concept of Faluda Islam is absolutely so thought-provoking, which is very true. It really is.
Thank you to that person.
Amar Jokyo is asking the name of the series.
The name of the series is called Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth. منورة الغدا ياما بالعربي and in Urdu कल हम दुनिया का वारिस को वारिस करेंगे. And that's what the series is called. And the video, there's often sub-series in this series. That's an umbrella term. And the video series is called Abjad, which is the name of Arabic numerology, which is sort of like mystical math. And yeah.
I find your names for your series and titles quite interesting. There's another question which I think is quite nice. So do you ever face an artist block if yes, then how do you deal or cope with the frustrations of it? And I think that's something that a lot of artists and writers and creatives suffer from. So
Yeah,
it'd be
well,
interesting to hear.
yeah, how do I deal with artist block? I mean, it depends on what I have to do. um, like, do I have a major deadline and I have an artist block? I mean, that for me, I think ultimately how I deal with artist block, whether I'm just, wondering why I haven't been creating for a while, or I need to create and it's difficult to, we need to, sitting with ourselves and silencing the world, for me, is really the only way to get inspiration, and taking a break. I think one of the worst things an artist can do is just to keep working and just to keep producing and to churn out work and to just keep churning out work, because then ultimately not only does your work suffer in terms of what you'd like to do, let's say you don't have enough time and you just have to make a thing, but our minds and our capacity suffers. I think creativity needs rest. And for me, I really, if I can afford it, I try and take breaks. And I think people who are starting out in this very, very, very ambitious and demanding art world don't necessarily get that opportunity to take breaks. But I think moments of solitude and breathing and rest, I think really help the inspiration going.
That's really very good advice. And I think over the last few months, a lot of us have had moments to just be quiet and sit within ourselves. And I hope that we've all been able to take as much advantage of that as possible.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
So someone is asking, since fashion is also a form of aesthetic self-representation, how important do you think it is for queerness? Would you like to answer
Fashion and
that?
queerness? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, fashion has multiple sides, right? And I think a lot of what's taking up a lot of people's brain space now is also ethical fashion, right? Not fast fashion, but ethical fashion. And I'm all for that, but I don't know enough about it to speak about it. So I'm just going to say I'm all for it. Can't speak on that front. But I think fashion from a point of self-expression, yeah, wait, I just want to look at the question again. Since fashion is also a form of aesthetic self-representation, how important do you think it is for queerness? I think it is very important for queerness, depending on who you are, ultimately.
Yeah.
I think some people in the sort of queer activist circle really put a lot of weight and priority onto it, because that is who they are. They appear, they are present, and if you are someone who was born as male and you're wearing super femme clothing and you're wearing super colorful clothing and you're wearing all the makeup that you want and you're wearing all the nail polish that you want, yeah, it is a statement. And if you have a public presence, it's a statement of freedom, and that what I wear, what I desire to wear, is not indicative of, or is like clothes are clothes are not gendered, right? This is ultimately the point. And some things are cut and look really nice for us, even if they're not in the men's section, which is totally valid. And it is a huge form of queer expression, because being queer is not being normative. And if your fashion is not normative, this is a form of queer fashion. I think we run a risk, however, when we think of fashion and queerness being related, is that we run a risk of being intertwined. We run a risk of, like, someone who's genderqueer doesn't necessarily have to look genderqueer.
Somebody who doesn't look a certain way. That's very true. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have literally 30 seconds left. So I want to thank you so much for your time and for this wonderful conversation. And everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for your questions. It was a pleasure, as always, talking to you, Zulfikar, and I'm going to give you a call afterwards. Thanks again.
Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me here, and thank you everyone who joined us.
Bye-bye, everyone.